The Pat Scotts we have in the auction all come from one source, one provenance. They differ. They're sort of split into two. There's two early works from the 1950s, and then the possibly more familiar to people, the later gold leaf. I'd love your opinion on certainly the start with the early one. I mean, taking them chronologically, the Courtyard 1952, what strikes you immediately is how flat it is.
It's not surprising because it was painted during a period that artists internationally were obsessed with the flatness of the picture plane. They were saying that a canvas is by its nature two-dimensional. So why should we play tricks of illusion to make things look three-dimensional? What we have to do is celebrate the actual intrinsic nature of a canvas, which is something that has length and width, but has no depth. And we see Scott doing that. He flips up the floor in the courtyard. He flips up the top of the table in the garden table. It's saying, I'm not playing the game of pretending that this is a window on the world. This is a painting. It's a disposition of flat, two-dimensional shapes on a canvas, and I celebrate that. Right from the start, Scott was drawn to geometry. He had at the center of his work, from the earliest things to the latest things in his career, the rectangle, the square, and the circle. And in the early works, which are figurative, where there's some subject matter, he's looking at something that he's seen in real life, a courtyard, but he's drawn to a courtyard, a particular one that has geometry at its center, those wonderful tiles in the floor, and then simple rectangles make up the walls in the background, and then that simple kind of repeated pattern of leaves at the top. He was drawn to subjects which had an underlying geometry, and then he flattens them on the picture surface.
And that was very modern for Ireland at that point. I mean, 1952.
He was certainly an outlier in terms of the Irish art scene of that period. And he would have been considered one of the avant-garde.
And you mentioned in your note that the taking out is as important as the putting in.
I think a good example of that is the one of the garden table. He's obviously trying to capture the freshness of the out of door and that light. And he's obviously looking at a thing we can identify, a garden table. But what he's done is clever. He's looked at the legs of the table and he's created a certain sense of distance, yeah. But then he flattens up the top, again, reminding us that this is not illusion. We look at something and then we make a flat, abstract composition.
And he took that then a step further. He took more out with the later work, the gold leaf.
He moved more and more to a very muted palette, but alleviated by bursts of gold. I think that the gold is tremendous, and I think the gold is even more powerful because he puts it against raw canvas, which is only alleviated by thin, transparent washes of white tempera paint. So the materials that he uses are very austere.
Is he using his architectural skills in that?
Well, it's interesting because he was one of the architects who worked with Michael Scott on Bosauros. They did a lot of mosaic tiles in the interiors. In Bosauros, they had these big, round, concave light wells. They were like giant suns. They were tiled in gold along the length of the dining room. So the circle was always an appealing motif for Scott.
Very Zen, isn't it? He have a very much affinity of the Japanese flag.
He always said that he loved that as an image. By his nature, Scott had a kind of a calm, reserved, ordered disposition.
In a previous discussion, you mentioned Sean Scully and the brushwork and the dynamic
they
of the painting.
They are both so, in terms of personality, so different. But they show how strongly the personality of an artist and the way that they deal with the world comes through in their paintings. He's searching for something spiritual. And I think that certainly, as a whole, works in a very poetic and restrained way.